can't argue that the modest fashion industry has done a lot for us, or a lot for younger girls who haven't felt seen.
I'm not going to be ashamed of being a hijabi Muslim woman. I feel like fashion plays a really big role in that.
With the concept of modesty, you're supposed to be, it's to be judged by what you have to say, by your character.
And how can someone truly convey to you through a screen their spirituality?
It's very hard to get the message out to a lot of these fashion bloggers that are making money and following their passions with fashion, but they are contributing to fast fashion.
Oh my gosh, hello, Dr. Tazzy here. How's it going? I look good as a doctor. I should have been a doctor. Too bad. I wasn't smart enough for that. Well, maybe I was. I just... Born to be wild. Maybe I should consider it. I'm really feeling like I look just like Dr. Tazzy. How may I help you? If anyone wants to pay for it, who's gonna pay for my med school? You can, okay? I will quit this, I'll quit everything, and I will pursue a career so I can wear this white coat. This is not a white coat, I just fashion, Speaking of fashion, let's today talk about modest fashion. To clarify, I know that modest fashion is not limited to the Muslim community, but for the sake of this video, I am speaking specifically about the Muslim modest fashion scene. And also, I'm from the US, so everything that I say is from a Muslim American perspective. Take whatever I say with a grain of salt and keep that in mind. Growing up, I always had an interest in fashion. I wasn't particularly great at it or anything, but it did intrigue me. I was obsessed with The Devil Wears Prada. I used to watch Ugly Betty. I used to watch this channel called Threadbangers where they did DIY sewing things. I had my whole sewing phase. I think in another video I talked about how I used to always pick up Teen Vogue. It was a world that I was always interested in, but I didn't quite have the skills or the talent. I wasn't necessarily good at it. There was this one time where I went to this event and someone was like, "Oh, are you a fashion blogger?" And I was so complimented. I was like, "Me? Oh, she's talking to me? Oh no. Wow, you think thank you so much. That's such a compliment." That means that I was dressed nice that day. Either that or it means that Muslim women are only known as fashion bloggers. Who knows? But in the time that I grew up in, there wasn't a lot to help me out. And there might have been a big Muslim modest fashion scene in places in the Middle East or in Malaysia or Indonesia, but there was nothing that I as a Pakistani American here in the US had access to, as the internet was not what it is today. In my high school years, I was fine. I used to do my thing. Sometimes I felt like a freak, but I don't really think that I cared very much. I would say that when I got to university is when I really contemplated taking it off. I had a loathe for wearing a scarf sometimes, and I feel like it was a time in my life that I was just really lost and insecure. And then a year or two before I graduated, that's when the modest fashion scene on social media popped off. I was obsessed. People like Asia, Winnie Detois, Dina Tokyo, Basma, Yasmin Kanar, hijabis. And then the modest fashion thing became accessible. I saw people styling hijab and experimenting and doing different things and giving me inspiration, and it felt so good to have fashion advice from people who were like me. And that's when I started dressing differently, and I had a confidence that I didn't have before. And then the scene kept growing and changing. And then there were more and more bloggers. It was so exciting. The market grew and we were everywhere. Modest fashion became accessible and normal. But as time passed, I think that we started to see the cracks in the pavement. Although I feel like there is great value in making all of this accessible, because I went through my childhood and my teenage years not having that, I really do think there's a lot of value in it. But in seeing this whole thing grow and seeing this journey, I wanted to explore some questions that I have about the modest fashion movement. Have we just replaced one beauty standard with another? Are we exploiting some to empower others? Is there even any spiritual value in any of this? Or are we completely missing the point? I had my own opinions, but I talked to other people to get their perspectives. And some of my opinions changed after these conversations, and some of them stayed the same. Some of them just kind of added another dimension to it. So let's start off with my first question. beauty standards. In seeing this whole thing unfold, I feel like there's an irony about wanting to be represented because we felt like the standard was making us feel left out, it wasn't really accommodating to us, but it in some ways feels like we just took Barbie and then just put a hijab on her.
And I think like what has happened is we've created like our own Barbie complex.
Yeah.
Like another version of the Barbie idea, but for a Muslim version.
Mhm.
And like, what does that look like? Like, you have to have a particular type of hijab to be cool. You have to have a particular material of hijab. You have to have a particular outfit. Like, if you're not a certain body type, then modesty is not really for you. Like, unless you wear like just wearing a body, right? Or if you're a certain complexion, like, what the heck? We're a diverse ummah. Like, we shouldn't be copying the mainstream in that way. We should have trailblazed what diverse fashion looks like, but we're falling into the same things that we've criticized the mainstream industry for doing.
Right.
And so
it's like we just replaced one beauty standard with another. When you see a lot of the top Muslim fashion bloggers, it can feel like everything starts to look the same. Everyone's kind of wearing the same thing. It feels like the people who are popular and get a lot of brand deals kind of have a specific look to them. And I mean, this is just the way of the world. Now, this modest fashion movement on social media was born out of young girls who felt like they didn't feel represented, felt like nothing was out there for them. But do the young girls now feel like if they don't look like these modest fashion bloggers, if they don't really fit that mold, do they feel less than? Does the new standard now make them feel insecure about themselves? I think that's a difficult thing to unpack because part of the problem is that we place our value on these external things that, of course, we're just gonna create a monster from whatever we're doing. And then there comes the issue of race and diversity within the Muslim modest fashion scene. In 2017, Shainute, I hope I said that right, Manal, she went to Dubai Fashion Week and she actually spoke up about this. She noticed that there were no other Black Muslim woman representation in terms of the bloggers that were flown out for the event. So there would be another layer of irony in this whole thing.
Finally, someone was saying something loudly enough because there were like, it's like as if people were like chatting about it. But when she said it as a big influencer, having hundreds of thousands of followers, it was like, okay, she's like, this is really a problem, you know? And I think she had said she was the only one, I think maybe other than her, Bess McKay, if her were at that event. And when she called that out, that was a moment when people were like, oh, you know, it's like that light bulb of, oh, Black people, they be here too. You know, it's like, dang, that we've been saying that. We're right here. We're like, hello. We're creating content too. We're people too. Right. You know, but you've been just excluding us for so long.
Muslims. But I think big things to take away from this is that, one, we have to be vocal. Manal was really brave in speaking up, but I think that it's not about just her. Everyone has to talk about these things. The other thing is, how do we make this something that people are just taking advice and it's not becoming, this is the standard? I had a conversation with Izdihar Bailey and I found her perspective on this to be really interesting. She talks about trying to figure out how to dress modestly and how actually going back to her own roots made her very confident in her dressing as opposed to adopting some sort of cookie cutter standard that was already out there or what was expected of her.
I think there's a point in every Muslim's life, whether they're born Muslim or converted to Islam, that they decide to be Muslim for themselves, not because of their family, not because of what's expected to them. And so I think that looks different ways. Sometimes that is deciding to wear hijab or not wear hijab or do things a certain way. And there's a bit of how often when people talk about putting on hijab, they say it's empowering, but I think the empowerment comes from your connection to it. And I felt more connected to my hijab when I started wearing these kinds of scarves versus, oh, everyone else is wearing like this jersey scarf and, you know, do it this way. And like, okay, that's what's expected of me. But this feels right. This feels like I have a connection to it. I likely have ancestors in Romania who wore scarves like this, and that makes me really happy to think about, you know.
The next question is, are we exploiting people to empower others? Now, what do I mean by that? Think about maybe a t-shirt that says feminist on it, made in a sweatshop somewhere by brown women who are in miserable conditions. The irony of it is just, it kills me. So I always feel bad every time I buy something. I'm like, yo, I'm contributing to fast fashion. I'm destroying the universe. I am oppressing human beings. This is blood cloth, that's how I feel. When we talk about fast fashion, I think to say that you're unaware of what happens in the fashion industry with fast fashion, I think a lot of people know about sweatshops and that kind of thing.
Toxic chemicals used to dye and treat clothing have been linked to miscarriages, birth defects, and cancer. You have to ask yourself, is it worth it?
The modest fashion industry is not removed from that. Now, a lot of the Muslim bloggers that I've seen wear stuff from like Zara and H&M, and my least favorite of all, Shein, whatever. Guys, we know how I feel about Shein, okay? Hey, babe. Oh, disgusting. I mean, it's weird, it's like when I'm shopping for a gift for relatives in Pakistan and I pull up a sweater like, this is a nice sweater, and then it says made in Pakistan. This little sweater immigrated to the United States and now I'm gonna tell him he has to go back. What's that about? But seriously, as Muslims, should we be promoting an industry that's destroying the planet, exploiting human beings? Some of these companies have ties with genocide of the Uyghur Muslim people. At what cost does it matter for us to be fashionable? Now, for me, this was a really interesting conversation because I feel like when it comes to fast fashion, I've always been like, it's this or it's that. And when I spoke with Maryam, who was a lot more knowledgeable on the subject than me, she highlighted how much more complicated it is. It's really not that black and white. So here's what she had to say.
People deal with this subject with such extremities. Either you're just into fast fashion or you see it as totally wrong and you just become this like anti-clothing, only thrift shopping, never buying anything from any other country, something like that. And that's not how it works, and that's not the solution. The world is already set in a lot of ways in how we produce things. And if anything's gonna change, it's gonna take maybe 50 years minimum for a significant change to happen. It's not wrong that these items are being produced in other countries. With the way the world currently works right now, there's something called product pools. Certain countries have certain skill sets, have invested the time and education in order to build those skill sets to produce within those certain product pools. So some countries their product pool is with automobiles. Countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia are very garment clothing focused. There's agricultural focus. These things take a lot of time for countries to shift out of them. China, you can notice from their last 30 years of history and uprising of labor protests, how you can visually see these shifts happening within this new age of mass production. And that's what's going to happen for a lot of countries. But the reality is these countries are purposely choosing these avenues, these product pools in order to give income. It's a very lazy approach to think, well, why don't we just not do that? Why don't we just not give them production and, we'll all be fine. It's recognizing that there are better ways to do what we're doing right now. There are solutions. It's very difficult. It has a lot to do with supply chain, has a lot to do with, and unfortunately, it's complicated because labor laws are regulated within each country. So although we're buying products from another country and we're upset if they're being mistreated, we technically don't really have a say of why that country is allowing certain laborers to be in certain conditions. But what we can do is take away our money, use our purchasing power for that to be influenced for them to change it, right? I think it's important for Muslims to educate themselves and to make conscious decisions towards that. And if I can give one simple piece of advice, which I remind myself every day, is consume less and consume with quality and longevity in mind. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can really cave in and see something beautiful and you want to purchase it, but purchase it with this mindset that you're not purchasing it because it's some trend that you're going to not want to wear next summer. Purchase it knowing that 5 years down the line, you're still going to be wearing it. I mean, I have clothes that people are like, oh, where'd you get that? And I'm like, maybe it's H&M, but it's H&M from 4 years ago, because I purchased it with this concept. It's a very I don't know about quality, but you take care of your clothing. It's a very basic purchase. It's something that can take you through the years, and trying to close the loop when you decide you are not interested in those pieces of clothing anymore.
And the last question that I have for this video is, have we lost the spiritual side of it all? So in Islam, dressing modestly, this is part of the belief system, to carry yourself modestly, and whatever that may mean to you, whether that's not being too flashy, whether that means that you're not really like open with the opposite sex. I think this is something that people do a lot of spiritual policing on the internet. You'll see when there is any Muslim woman, you can probably even check my comment section, people love to be like, what is this hijab? Your hair is showing, da 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 da. People want to police all of that all the time. Now, although it's a very physical thing, it feels very easy to make judgments. This is one thing I noticed about the internet. People think they know everything when they watch something about a person, but whatever, that's for another video. It sometimes feels like we've kind of moved in a very superficial direction when it comes to fashion. You could say, well, fashion could be very frivolous. Well, obviously it's going to move in that direction. It's such a material thing. But I felt like it was an interesting question to ask.
I don't believe that it's wrong to want things as long as it doesn't get in the way of your faith. And again, that's each individual person's own viewpoint and their own reflection to themselves. There's nothing wrong with, nice things, like even on Eid, the Prophet said to dress nicely, to dress, to feel happy about yourself. So from like a spiritual perspective, I don't believe there's anything wrong with that. As long as you maintain your modesty level according to your faith. And of course, I'm not like a scholar or anything, but that's just like my own personal belief on the matter. Like, I find fashion to be a really great tool to get closer to my deen instead of to get further from it, because it makes me feel proud of being Muslim.
If these spaces aren't talking about God and aren't talking about faith, then is it really Islamic fashion, or is it really modest fashion? It's not something that is like we can just constantly say is, oh, my faith is a personal thing. It's not, because you can't talk about modesty and you can't say the reason that do you know what I mean? So it's like a roundabout way of answering it, but I just think that that's where I feel with where we're at the moment.
I honestly don't believe that fashion is superficial in the first place. Especially in our realm. I mean, some fashion can be very superficial, right? But for us as Muslim women, and we're trying to propagate modest fashion / hijab fashion, to me, it already has a higher meaning, right? So there's nothing superficial about me propagating, the abaya company and the hijab company and whatever, because at the end of the day, it's fun and creative, and it's just kind of like consumerism or whatever. But it's also, hey, like, this is a really great fabric for you to wear that's not going to make you hot and itchy and want to rip off your hijab in the middle of the summer. Like, wear jersey, here it is, and let me style it for you in 10 different ways, Okay. So it's fun, but I don't think it's necessarily superficial. I think it can get very superficial when you choose to completely ignore things that are meaningful, like social justice, or like the environment, or like fundraising for causes and things like that. If you completely ignore those things, then like even your hijab fashion and your modest fashion and your makeup or whatever else you're doing to inspire the world, it's going to be very superficial.
Well, I think, if you're choosing to cover because for God, right, it's not for other people. And so in that sense, why does it matter if you're wearing is fashionable or not? And I think that was a big thing for me, where it's like, if I'm going to be dressing modestly for God anyways, why not do it in a way that makes me happy, whether or not it's socially acceptable or common to other people? I think some would say not to, like, you don't want to bring too much attention to yourself, so why would you dress so out there? But if the whole point is this is a way for me to connect to God, to be in a position where I can pray with what I'm wearing, and, to only be concerned with that relationship, then, what other people think of me should not be a factor at all.
So in regards to that, I think it's very easy to lose the meaning of what this is all supposed to be. I think when we get excited about representation and wearing nice clothes, there's a point at which if your identity becomes about what you're wearing, if your whole self-worth is about how fashionable you are, I think there's a problem with that. I also think there's a problem with this idea that we constantly have to have new outfits or new clothes. It's not sustainable, and it's also, I think it's very damaging spiritually to a person, because you feel this sense of competitiveness. It becomes a thing of I am better, whether you like it or not. Now, you can feel good about yourself. There's a line between like self-confidence and feeling good, and I iron these clothes, I feel pretty good about myself today. But I think that when you get too sucked into fashion and that whole scene, I think it can become very spiritually empty when it's just about how do I portray my best outfit, and I just have to look good, I just have to look good. I think from a spiritual perspective, and I don't want to get too much into this, but a lot of people got really butthurt when a lot of the original bloggers, a lot of the people who kind of were at the beginning of the movement started taking off their hijabs. I have a lot to say about stuff like that, not in regards to them taking it off, but like how people react to that. But that maybe I'll save for another time. But one thing that I did want to say is I think that this whole thing becomes dangerous when people get really spiritually invested in like social media fashion bloggers as some sort of spiritual guide for themselves. Like if someone takes off their hijab, if you feel some sort of disappointment, you can feel disappointment from me just by saying something wrong in the video. I get that all the time. I think what's really bad is when you start placing your faith in that place. Like you feel like if someone else took it off, it hit you spiritually. It was damaging to you because you felt like they were your role model. Well, you should live for yourself, and you should make those decisions because it's an internal thing, not an external thing. It shouldn't be based off of other people that you've never even met or know. So I guess one of my pieces of advice is also to take things at face value. You can take what you want from this industry. You can take tips, you can take inspiration, but at the end of the day, you have to really align it with who you are as a person and really understand that at your core, why you do what you do. Because if it is for a superficial thing, motivation comes like this, and motivation also goes like that. Life can't be about just motivation. There has to be really deep intrinsic reasons why you do things. And so in the same way, maybe this whole fashion thing isn't inherently good or bad, and it's never going to be perfect, but I think as human beings we should be positive and take the best from things and just leave the rest. And at the same time, it doesn't mean you have to be complicit and not speak up about things. If you see something wrong, say something. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are my thoughts. I'd like to know what your guys' thoughts are on the ethics of modest fashion, what your guys' opinions are. As always, it's always a pleasure to talk to you guys. I will be back soon. Thank you. Okay, like, comment, subscribe. You can find me on the TikTok. You can find me on the Instagram, whatever you like. TazzyPhe out. Bye.